So the adoption of cloud technologies has been effectively enabled and driven by a lot of the requirement to share data more broadly and more actively. So whilst law enforcement is a net consumer of data and utilises more of other people's data than its own, it has an obligation to onwardly share that information with a huge variety of partners operating at very different risk appetites and security criteria. So between local authorities, kind of third sector and charities, to the broader criminal justice community, they effectively operate at quite a high level of data sensitivity and scrutiny around their data, and have to share it with organisations that do not have the mandate or requirement to protect their information systems in quite the same way. So that has led to moving a lot of information out of the traditional perimeter silos to make them accessible to those parties, but also to move to a more policy-based access model, where effectively they can set the criteria for access without having to provision the technical controls to do so. So previously, where they might have had to provide dedicated laptops, dedicated devices, or build controls to be directly consumed by those partners, they are now looking to use those secure cloud environments to effectively enable access and to grant them auditability, insight, and kind of observability into what's happening in those environments without having to directly manage and control the environments itself, because that comes with quite a large management and operational overhead, which those organisations just are not scaled to support longer term. It's also effectively enabled sharing, collaboration, and the interchange of intelligence. So law enforcement has always, through mutual aid, had quite a big focus around sharing operational intelligence from the investigative and law enforcement response side, and you're now actually starting to see that trend into the cybersecurity, but also just operational technology space, and through the rise of services like the National Management Centre for policing, starting to look at where that data can be dynamically shared and delivered in the context of each force's operating environment rather than in isolation as had happened previously, because it allows them to adopt and directly respond to those emergent changes in context. And responsiveness is absolutely key in every aspect of law enforcement. If you look at the fundamentals of the law enforcement community network, which we generally just refer to as LECN, as a departure from the Police National Network and kind of PSN for policing, there's much more focus around the provision of that core connectivity to law enforcement agencies, whereas the previous networks were also heavily utilised by industry, supporting partners and others. There's far more focus around it in terms of how those organisations should interoperate and share information with law enforcement without directly having access to the same core networks and devices, because that moves the boundary of assurance to encompass those organisations in a way that most of law enforcement's not geared up to support from a commercial assurance capacity, and that's where the Police Digital Service is playing an absolutely key and fundamental role. In terms of managed services moving forward, as we've seen with other trusted community networks, the focus will be around how partners and certainly providers of services go about presenting those services to law enforcement without direct access to their networks. And that will lead to the rise of kind of trusted managed gateway services, and also a lot more requirement for zero trust applications to those applications that are hosted specifically for the law enforcement community. We'll also see the codes of connection or codes of service where they exist for those networks and environments kind of becoming core elements and flow downs for the commercial contracts for providers into the criminal justice community, and certainly within law enforcement, effectively to provide suitable assurances that those services are being run in a way that is suitable for law enforcement data, as determined by Part 3 of the Data Protection Act, but without having to extend the obligation to those law enforcement partners to provide the equipment and environments in which those services are supplied.